We are recording, so we're on.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen, and I put together some kind of rough set of claims that. So sometimes in philosophy, when we give arguments or for something, or if we're trying to make a point, we might give like the formal, like, if A then B, A, or A is C, C, or A is B, B is C, and therefore A is C, or these, like, there's like 9 or 10 of them that of these kinds of forms of argument that you might see. But another way that you might see when you read philosophy is they give a list of claims and they said one of these must be false, right? Something like that.
Yep.
And I guess that's the form that I'm going to give it. And I could probably condense it, but I wanted to get like some of the center, all the sorts of claims that I would make, even though you could collapse one into another. I might still make a claim and they might seem different in conversation. So that's why I'm separating them. But so let me go ahead and share my screen.
And now I want to warn you that the force of some of these claims seems to be lost on me. And it isn't because I'm ignorant of philosophy and I haven't read about it. It's because I believe I have a very different way of thinking than I had, I'd say, 18 years ago when I started this. So I have modified a lot. So be patient with me when I do not understand something or do not see the force behind it. So,
all right, that's fine. Yeah. So the number one is probably the most integral, right? If number one falls, that has not only implications on philosophy of mind, but ethics as well. Yep. Okay. So now traditionally, there's a guy named David Hume, and he saw that is and ought are distinct to a point where they can't be logically derivative of one another. So let me just give a simple example, right? If I say that I should be talking, right, or if it's true that I should be talking, well, how I'm going to know that is not going to be based on whether I am talking or not. Okay? So let's say I should be talking, right? And my computer crashes. Okay? Well, that's a failure with respect to the norm, right? The ought, right? In the same way that if I should be talking, well, it's actually the case that I am talking, but we understand that just because I am talking doesn't establish the fact that I should be talking, right? So the idea is that I should be talking is distinct from whether I am talking or not talking, but whether I am talking or not talking is understood relationally in terms of failure or success or failure, respectively. So let me say that again in more simple terms. If I should be talking, the fact that I am talking means that there's success. I should be talking. I am talking. This is good. I'm in accord with the standard, with the norm, with the ought, right? Now, if it's the case that I should be talking, but I'm muted by speed, then that means there's failure with respect to the norm. So I should be talking, but speed mutes me such that I can't talk, so I am not talking, so there's failure. Okay. And the idea of failure and success are closely tied with correction, right? If it's the case that I believe that I should be talking and I'm muted, if there's a means of unmuting myself, then I would, given the fact that I should be talking. That is the goal, right? So not only do we understand failure and success in terms of an ought, but also correction or rightness or wrongness in terms of an ought, right? So if we look at, so that's sort of the line of reasoning to differentiate is and ought. And that ties in with number 3. Okay. Now we'll get to number 2 later. Okay. Number 3, when I say, and this is just what I mean by when we express an ought, right? If I should be talking, that is what we take to be normative or prescriptive. Okay. So, if it's the case that I should save a drowning child, then that is normative, right? And to explicate normativity, to explicate ought a little bit more further, in a further manner, look at 4, right? When we're talking about an ought expression or normativity, what that does, excuse me, is create this possibility of success or failure.
Okay.
Right and wrong, good or bad. I don't mind being interrupted. If I'm not, I need to be stopped if I'm not understood. So are you with me? I don't know if
good. We're
okay.
good.
Yeah. Okay. So I've explicated what I mean by ought. Okay. Now, so in number one, I described, well, ironically, I should be careful with my terminology. I've explicated what prescriptive means on my view, and I've explicated how that's distinct from descriptive. Okay. In the sense that descriptions involve what is happening. What is happening. Okay. Not what should be happening. Okay. So descriptive states, number 5, express how the world is. Okay. If I describe speed, I might say that he's bald. Right. That's descriptive. Okay. If I describe, the color of the water as green, that's descriptive. Notice I haven't talked about whether speed should be bald or whether the water should be green.
Right.
Those are completely different conceptually. Okay. And notice that from just the mere fact of of you being bald, we can't get to you should be bald. So if speed is bald, there's what G.E. Moore says, an open question about whether you should be bald or shouldn't be bald. Okay. So descriptive states explain how the world is, and how the world is going to undermine how the world should be. Okay. So number 6, or I have 2 number 6s. I guess there were. Sorry for that little typo. Let me fix that. Okay. So number 7. No. Number 6. Okay. Claims about the natural describe the world how it is, right? Describe how the world is. So now, when I make a claim about how the world is, right? And if we understand the world to be, part of the world as being natural. Now, if you're a naturalist, the whole world is going to be natural, right? I'm talking about how it is, maybe with respect to your baldness, or whether the water is green, whether
Wait a minute. Wait, I'm bald. When the hell? When did that happen? I didn't notice it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, and the point is that if I say that the water is green, okay, and you might consider that to be some kind of descriptive fact, and it might have a naturalistic explanation, right? So if I might describe, well, the reason why the water is green is because the water is reflecting the light emitted from the trees, or that it might be polluted, right? And I'm starting to give a scientific account of what it is I'm observing, this descriptive state of affairs, right? And so anytime you give some kind of naturalistic explanation or some observation utilized in the sciences, you're describing the world. You're not saying how the world should be, right? It doesn't make sense to say, think about your favorite subject, and many with respect to science, let's just talk about biology for a second. Let's assume that it's part of the natural sciences, right? Stuff like, guanine and cytosine are base pairs with one another, right? It would be a very different claim to say that water and guanine should be pairing with each other, okay? Because when I look into the DNA and I see guanine and cytosine paired with each other, and I see some nucleotide guanine and its base pair cytosine floating separate from each other, right? It's going to be a really interesting claim to say, well, that guanine should be paired with cytosine, right? Well, from the fact that they're either paired or not paired, okay? It seems like that's going to be a different claim altogether. All we can say scientifically when we're making that observation is that in this part, guanine there's a hydrogen bond, there's hydrogen bonding between guanine and cytosine. And in this case, guanine and cytosine are separated. There's no hydrogen bond. And here I'm describing all the natural states of the world, right? And so if you're coming in and saying that guanine should be paired with cytosine, right, you're making a different claim altogether, okay? So I don't know if that was clear or not. Do you want to say anything to that speech?
No, that's clear.
Okay. So now if we distinguish descriptive and prescriptive, that means that whatever's prescriptive, if it's the case, if it's the case that the natural truths are descriptive, and if there's a distinction between prescriptive and descriptive, then that means whatever is construed as prescriptive, that's not descriptive, therefore it can't be natural. Okay? Now, so moving on, how does this relate to the mind? Well, remember, look at number 4. I said normativity creates the possibility of failure or success, right? I should be talking. We illustrated examples there. Now look at number 7. Desires also create the possibility of failure or success. They're standards themselves. And that ties with number 8. Okay? How so? Well, think about the claim, I ought be talking, right? And think about the claim, I desire to talk. In terms of success and failure, it actually operates the same way. When I gave the example, if I should be talking, well, there could be failure. Excuse me, there could be failure in the sense that speed could be muting me, and there's failure, right? With the respect to the ought. Same thing with a desire. I desire to talk. Well, speed could just mute me, and I'm failing, right? So that's to say, desires are linked to normativity. In fact, normativity, right, or desires are constitutive of normativity, right? What it means to have a desire is to establish a standard of success or failure. So if that's true, if 7 and 8 are true, well, look back at number 4, and then look at number 3, right, respectively, and then go back to number 1 with the prescriptive and descriptive distinction. So if it's the case that desires are normative states represent oughts represent prescriptions are not descriptions, then desires are prescriptive and not descriptive. If all natural truths are descriptive, that means desires are not natural. And that is the argument for my kind of dualism.
Okay. Number 2. Do you want to flesh out
Oh,
those?
so notice I only talked about desires. I haven't talked about beliefs. Okay. So I presented desires first because it's an intuitive example because it really, really matches well with I should be talking and a desire to talk. Those operate the same way in the sense that they create the possibility of failure to success. But what about belief, right? Well, the point is that desires, right? Those are going to be a different kind of norm than the sort of norm that's being implemented in a belief. Okay. So I haven't gotten there, but number 2 is supposed to be for the future, right? In the sense that when I believe that something is true, I can fail, right? And it's not so obvious how that failure is cashed out. And just to be brief, what a belief is, on my view, is a kind of commitment to the truth. If I believe that it's raining outside, I'm committed to the truth that it's raining outside. In other words, when you believe something, you're aiming at the truth, right? And that notion of aim, right, again, creates the possibility of failure in the same sense as desire, right? So a way of saying this is that if I believe, right, that 2 + 2 equals, let me give a better example. If I believe that the square root of 9 is 6, okay, if I take that to be true, that's a kind of commitment that's missed the mark, right? It's a failure because the commitment is to the truth, and then it is the case that the square root of 9 is not 6, it's 3, right? So once I recognize that the square root of 9 is not 6, then I'm committed to a different truth, a different proposition. That is the proposition that the square root of 9 is 3, right? So beliefs can fail. I mean, we do this all the time when we say that belief isn't right. That's a false belief, right? You're wrong for thinking this, right? We are demanding revision because we understand that the nature of a belief is that it's a commitment to the truth. So it functions very similarly to desire. However, the meaningful distinction between maybe a desire and something like a belief is the kind of ought. So maybe the ought in a belief is a commitment to the truth, which sometimes people say it's an epistemic ought, right? Because epistemic means like of knowledge, right? So remember, a brief formulation of knowledge is that it has to be justified true belief. Okay, so the idea is that the ought there, an epistemic ought, is one that gets closer at knowledge. That's to say, to get closer to the formula of knowledge, which is one of the components of that is being true. So that's why when I say that I should not believe that, or I ought not believe that the square root of 9 is 6, that's a epistemic ought, not a moral ought or a practical ought. Okay, but if I say I desire to get to work, or so I desire to, I don't know, ride my bicycle or drive my car, there's nothing epistemic going on. We're not talking about knowledge so much as we're talking about a practical ought, right? Given that my goal that I want to get to work, I have another goal to use my car to get there. A desire one way implies another desire. And so if I desire to get to work, I ought to desire driving a car or whatever, right? And that's not an epistemic ought. Some people might cast that out in terms of a practical ought, or even in some cases a moral ought. Okay, institutional oughts have to do with stuff like laws or even God's commands, arguably so, right? If the law prescribes, right, that you ought not steal, okay, or it says you cannot steal, that's a deontic cannot, right? That's a kind of ought. It's not necessarily reason giving, but the idea it's understood in terms of an institution and what they want you to do, or what they would have you do, or what you should do, right? It's a little bit different than the sort of internal ought that is in one's mind, right? Which is to say, a belief or desire is an internal ought. But that's 2, right? 2 is supposed to be getting at this. Well, it's not just desires that kind of reflect normativity. Well, belief reflects normativity. That's it. That's it.
Okay. So that's it. Let's see.
That's the view.
Now, a lot of people are not persuaded by this because they would say that all of these things are subsumed by our understanding what the brain does. So how would you respond to that?
Well, presumably the brain is natural. So if you're describing the brain, you're talking about something non-prescriptive. Okay, so this is why I don't think the mind is understood in terms of the brain, in terms of an identity relation. Okay, whether that be the way that the brain behaves or the actual physical substance, for lack of a better word, of the brain. Okay, and the reason why is that if the brain is natural, anything predicated of it is going to be descriptive. But when I say that I should be talking to speed right now, that's prescriptive, right? And that's understood in terms of my desire or my obligation to myself, given that my desire. And that's prescriptive, right? So there's something to say that understanding beliefs and desires in terms of a descriptive state, you're disagreeing with the first number 1, right? You're disputing that, look, I see where this falls apart. It's number 1, Danny. Okay. So if you understand the mind in terms of a natural phenomenon like the brain, you're rejecting number 1. Okay. And I think there are, I mean, that I tried to give a brief explication of number 1 through Hume, but I didn't know if he wanted to go further into that. But that's the implication. If you think that the mind, or at least intentional states like beliefs and desires, are just identical to brain states or the way the brain behaves, I think that commits you to rejecting number 1.
Okay. Distinct concepts. No, I wouldn't reject that. I'm concerned about number 6. Claims about the natural describe how the world is. What do claims have to do with how the world is?
Well, you're right. The idea of a claim is that it can fail, right? If I claim that it's raining outside, that's a belief, right? Okay. So the idea is that truths, maybe a better way to phrase it for number 6, is that truths about the natural world describe how the world is.
Describe how the world is. So a truth about, okay, if you say, what was your should example?
The what example?
You should. Okay. So you might tell me I should be paying attention to my girlfriend instead of talking to you.
Mhm.
Okay. So you were compelled to make that statement, and that statement is probably based on something in your brain, something that's been happening over the last 20 minutes in your brain. Basically, you've been there. There's this nagging feeling. How is that not perfectly physical? That desire.
Okay, so
That should.
so the question becomes: the answer to your question there is it seems to be rejecting 8.
It seems to be what?
Rejecting 8.
Rejecting. Let's see. Desires are normative. See, the way you're describing all of these things does not seem problematic, because you're describing things that we have English words for and we have concepts for. But how can you show that they're not based on brain states or a
Okay,
brain?
well, like we said before, brain states do you think they're natural or right? They're natural.
Right.
Okay. So if they're natural, look at number 6. Truths about the natural world describe how the world is. Right? And look at if you're committed to that, then descriptive states express how the world is, which means that if you accept number 1, they're not prescriptive. So that if you accept all the premises, right, what you're going to say is brain states are not prescriptive. Okay, but desires are prescriptive. They're normative. Okay, so the thing is that if you say that brain states are identical to desires, you're saying that something that's not prescriptive is prescriptive, and that's a logical contradiction.
But if you're talking about the physical world, okay, which you're talking about the physicality of your brain and what is causing all of these things, presumably, okay, you are not talking about any of these things. So if what you have here is, it seems like a language game, that works very well for describing, for me and you communicating about our desires and our shoulds and our oughts and all of that, right? So, I mean, if all of that stuff is in a language game, and I'm telling you that all of these things can be fleshed out in neuroscience to show how your brain comes up with all of these states, or why you would develop a desire or a feeling that you should go and talk to your girlfriend, that if we could explain that naturally, we're describing something other than this particular language game.
Okay, so I think the way I'm understanding your question is in terms of look, I'm not going to dispute an interaction between the brain and the mind. Okay, I don't think that's exactly what you're saying, but one thing I'm not disputing is that the mind interacts with the brain, right? So let's just give before we get to the brain or something like that, let's give a quick account of a quick account of an interaction that seems really obvious, right? Okay, let's say I scratch myself, right? I get a laceration, okay? That can be described completely in physical terms. I'm just described, right? The idea is that you can measure the laceration. You could talk about the amount of blood loss. This is all going to be natural phenomena, right? Now, from that might motivate me in some sense, right? That might cause a desire to get a Band-Aid, okay? When we're looking at the desire to get a Band-Aid, we can give a very good explanation for why I formed that desire, right? If you're thinking that I have that kind of desire, right? Well, he got a laceration. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want continued bleeding. I don't know. It's bleeding, right? And I don't know. Like you can just give a whole account in terms of prescriptive and non-prescriptive causes, okay? But the thing is that the thing with this argument is showing that the element, the state in which I desire, though it can be explained or caused by something non-prescriptive or natural, it's not going to be itself natural.
Okay, I don't see how that follows. That our desires, if they are based on a process in your brain for the last 3 minutes or whatever, and it generates these what you would call desires, and you're naming it desires. Okay, I don't understand how that underlying process is not physical, or how you can show that it's not physical. You have a desire. You have a desire for something you do not have yet. I always use the ham sandwich in that I'm sitting in my chair and suddenly I get this like thought that I want to go upstairs and see if there's any ham in the fridge and make a ham sandwich, right? And I walk up the stairs, and as I'm walking up the stairs, I see the cat, and I decide to give the cat a treat. And in that time, I no longer have that desire particularly. But then after the cat, give the cat a treat. I go walking back into the living room, see my chair, and say, "Oh, I wanted a ham sandwich." And now I turn around, go back up the stairs, open the refrigerator. There's no ham, hence I fail. All of this can easily be described in brain processes and states. And I think you're tripping up a little bit on like claims of, claims about the natural describe how the world is, describing how the world is being.
We can delete claims. I'm going to put truths. That way it's more clear.
Truths about the natural world. Okay, that truths. Okay, what we know about the natural world, what we know about our brain state. The average person walking upstairs to get a ham sandwich doesn't know anything about how the natural world.
It's not about knowledge, right? That's why I changed the word from claim to truth.
Yeah, but still, you're talking about a description. So we're talking about an entirely physical description of an organism. Like, okay, would you accept that a raccoon is sitting around and his stomach's kind of tugging on him, and he's like, "Oh, I have a desire for opening a garbage can," and then he takes out into the neighborhood and looks for a garbage can? Would you accept that that is entirely explainable in natural terms?
In terms of the raccoon forming the desire, you might have a naturalistic explanation, okay, but the desire itself is not going to be natural in the view.
Okay, so it sounds like you're reifying desire into a category that cannot be resolved by a natural description, and that you're doing almost without even knowing it. It's
well, what I'm telling you that logically speaking, if you don't want to be irrational, and if you either got to reject one of these premises of the 8, or if you accept them all, if they're all true, then you're committed to the conclusion.
Nope.
Okay, which one do you reject?
The entire.
Okay, so you reject the number 1.
No, the entire structure of the argument. What you just said, that if I logically accept these words that you're reciting to me, and they have a logical form, that I am accepting that things cannot be described naturally.
I'm saying that you're committed to saying that the conclusion follows from the, right?
If all of these things can be described naturally and explained as brain states, then all we have is a sequence of brain states here. Okay?
Then look, which premise do you deny out of the 8?
That's not the point. I'm rejecting the entire.
You reject 1 through 8, then.
I'm rejecting the project. I'm not rejecting any of the premises.
Look, I'm giving an argument for my claim, and you're just saying that the whole just giving an argument is problematic, and I'm not understanding that.
Giving the argument in this form, trying to say that your oughts, your desires, your normativity descriptions, trying to say that any of those things, basically trying to say that any of those things are real, except under the condition that your brain presents them. Okay, so they are all explained naturally by your brain, by various states of your brain, all of them, and you're putting them out as an argument.
You're begging the question
to claim. No, I think you are.
Wait, no, I begging. That means that my conclusion is in one of the premises.
Okay,
right?
Your project is to show a logical argument. Okay, where you give 8. What do you got? 8 premises.
Yeah, 8 statements that all relate in a way where one of them has to be false if you were to reject my conditional down here, the sort of the conclusion.
Right. And you've constructed a language game where
I don't know what that means. Now, it's just an argument. Do you take arguments to be language games?
Yes. Oh, they always
Okay.
are. They always
Do you
are.
think, okay, so when so you're talking it like it's some kind of problem to give an argument.
An argument like this, in which everyone is question begging, in that you.
Which one is question begging? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6?
One. Okay. Is and ought are distinct concepts. Okay. Right there, we're talking about something within that language game. We're talking about the is ought language game that humans would play. And if I look at that from the outside as a strict naturalist, all I'm seeing is a human making is ought noises, okay, and basically attaching linguistic and cultural significance to them and claiming that they are distinct, right? And now if I'm inside of the human being, me and you talking, and I'm inside of the language game, I'm going to say, oh, that's true. I'm going to agree with you, right? And my saying that that's true is simply another noise that I'm uttering as a natural, completely natural animal. And I'm saying, okay, well, that one's true. And we go through all 8. And then you're claiming that I'm irrational if I don't accept your conclusion.
No, that's not what I said. I said that if you accept all 8 and deny the conclusion, that's irrational.
Yeah, that is how you've constructed the logical form. And I'm saying that the entire form is question begging.
Okay, well then let me make it. I'll ask you this conclusion. Do you think that you're committed to the conclusion here?
Yep.
Okay, so do you think that the form is just a language game to you?
Yes.
Okay, what do you mean?
It's a logical form, and logically it makes sense. Okay.
Okay, do you think that if someone said that I reject A as C, do you think they're being irrational?
If you reject A and C?
What? A is C. If you reject the conclusion and think that the premises are true,
sure,
that they're being irrational. Okay.
Yeah, if A is true and B is true and B is C, or A is B and B is C, so I accept those two things as true, it would be irrational to not accept that.
Right. So if I reformed the argument above in the form of a syllogism, like A is B, in this form of syllogism, would that make things more clear for you?
No, it would. It's clear enough as it is. Okay.
Okay. So then I don't understand why you are disputing the claim that it's irrational to reject the conclusion if you accept all of the premises that I gave, 1 through 8.
Let's look at the conclusion. Okay, if all of these are true, you know, which I believe I can accept, then desires are not natural states. Okay, that is there is the problem. So it's in your conclusion that there's a problem. They are non-natural. You're claiming that that desires can be non-natural. Go back up so I can see the top. Okay, so where does it show that a desire in a human being is not fleshed out or not hashed out completely with brain states?
Okay. We agree. Look in the bottom here. You and I agree that brain states are natural, right? And here we have natural. Okay. So when you think natural, think of brain states. So truths about the natural, that's to say the sorts of truths about the brain, perhaps, describe how the world is. Do you dispute number 6?
Number 6 is still a little bit iffy with me. Okay, truths about the natural. Okay, so number 6 is the power behind your conclusion. So you're saying that truths about the natural describe how the world is. Okay, right. And up above, you have already made a distinction between is and ought.
Right.
And you have made a category error.
Which one do you accept? Sorry, go ahead.
The is that you're talking about in number 6, okay, is about naturalism, about how the world is, about how atoms are lined up and how they collide. The is and the ought above are about how humans make this is ought distinction. And so
Look, okay, go
okay,
ahead.
second, I disagree with Hume that you cannot derive an is or an ought from an is. Okay. You cannot derive an ought from an is if you're playing in this, if you're just playing between humans, okay? And
I don't know. Can you explain that? You've said this multiple times, and I don't understand. Do you think concepts are like truths are psychological?
Truths are psychological. I don't know why we would be. If we're talking about naturalism, then when you say truths are psychological, you're trying to draw me back into your language game again, and I'm saying that you can't get there from here. So you can't get from this particular game to what is really going on in the natural world without dragging in a whole lot of neuroscience. Okay. And
so I guess from what I'm collecting is that you reject 6 or something, or and 1. Is that what I'm understanding?
6 and the conclusion, the way the conclusion goes from one category to another.
Look, the conclusion is going to be worthless if it's worthless if you don't accept one of the 8, right? I get that. Okay. So it seems like the reason why you did not accept the conclusion must be because it seems like you're rejecting 1 because you said you disagree with you, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
That would be 1, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, if we are trying to talk about naturalism and we're trying to talk about whether or not our mind is a physical thing, then I would have to reject 1 on that particular hashing out of this project. Okay, it doesn't make sense. Is and ought are within. Is not.
Earlier, you had said you accepted it, so you changed your mind here. But
I know, and that's what I mean. You have cleverly worded this game so that the conclusion looks reasonable, but then on further going from 6 to the conclusion, there's a problem there.
Okay, so it's not just 1. You have a problem with 6 as well.
Well, it's it's from 1 to 5. Okay, I'm going along with you saying, yeah, that makes sense, right? But then in 6, we cross over between this human game that we're playing and naturalism. And when you do that, you necessarily have to step outside of your humanity, outside of your game, and look at it from a naturalistic worldview.
Well, so, if you're looking at it, that would be a game as well.
Yeah, we could say that's a game too.
You see, I promise you that most philosophers that even disagree with me and would agree with your conclusion are never going to invoke as a response that this is simply a language game. Okay. They're going to dispute a premise. Okay. And give an argument against it. Okay. And it seems like you're trying to do that. Right. But the point is that whether you could step in or out of your point of view, and I don't know what that would mean to step out of your point of view. The point is that there's still going to be a fact of the matter about whether the concepts mesh. Okay. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks. If they were to think that X is also not X, okay, in the same way, at the same time, the idea is that if they held that to be true, right, that their psychology doesn't save them from having a false belief. Okay, the game that they played, as you're saying, doesn't save them from a false belief. In the same way that if someone believed that X is X, a simple identity relation, right, their game, however you're using it, their reasoning to that conclusion is not gonna dispute the truth value of that proposition. So I'm not so sure how language game plays into an argument and a conclusion between two people that are disagreeing.
Okay, so if we are to look at the question of naturalism, we are necessarily going to, and then we want to look at we want to look at something that's going on within humans, and we're trying to decide whether or not that is completely explicable in naturalistic terms, right? Do you agree that necessarily we are stepping out and asking what humans are? What are humans?
Not exactly so much as what are beliefs and desires.
What now? Wait a minute now. So you don't agree that we're necessarily okay, if we're explaining naturalism entirely and we're explaining ourselves, all of ourselves in naturalistic terms.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. Are you asking what I'm trying to do or something else?
No,
you were giving a different question. My bad. I misunderstood you.
I'm giving you the view from the naturalist side of things.
Okay, you have an argument then? Is that where we're going? We're going to give an argument for naturalism, or so we're moving away from my argument?
No, we're not going to give an argument for naturalism yet. That's more involved.
Well, I thought you disputed the first premise. Why not talk about the first premise? Or why talk about the sixth premise, right?
I don't dispute the first premise until I get to number 6 and the conclusion.
Okay,
and
so
then it becomes obvious that you're pulling that you are switching categories somewhat.
Okay, so 6. Which one do you want to talk about first? 6, because the conclusion doesn't matter at this point, right? The conclusion only makes sense if all the premises are true. Okay, now 6. Okay, that you're saying that's a kind of firstly problematic. Okay, so let's talk about 6 then. Okay.
Hey, can you put this? Have you ever put this into like predicate logic?
I've had people do it, but I mean predicate. You mean in symbolic logic or something like that?
Yeah, predicate rather than propositional.
If you want me to do that, I can't do that off the top of my head, right? Yeah. And it's not. This is not, like I said, this is not a valid form. And I had asked if you want me to put it in a valid form, if that would be easier. And I could do that. But the point is that some philosophers do it this way, where look, here's a set of claims, right? A set of what I take to be true. One of them has to be false for the conclusion to be false, or something like that. But if you want to do it in a different form, maybe, I could prepare that. But ultimately, if I put it in a different form, we're still going to be disagreeing about these premises, whether I put it in this form or that form.
Yeah. It's not our distinct concepts, prescriptive versus descriptive, and you connect that to number 6.
Right, because the idea is that if it's false, that truth about the natural world can describe oughts, right? Well, then there's a conversation, right? To think that when you're doing in science, for instance, that you're talking about how the world should be, not how the world is.
Right. And how the world should be is something that is happening in your brain. You think you should have that ham
in your mind, on my view, in the mind.
Man, your brain. It's happening.
Well,
in your brain.
wait. Look at this right now. Do you accept this?
Brain states equals a natural. What is that?
Are brain states natural states?
I don't like to call them brain states, to tell you the truth. Let's call them brain processes.
Okay. No problem.
Brain processes are natural.
And if they're not, if that's not prescriptive, which means that it's descriptive. It's not prescriptive.
Gigantic category error there. You cannot talk about brain processes being prescriptive.
Right, they're not prescriptive.
No. Well, you can describe what is happening in your brain when you think about prescriptive things, but you cannot make that statement.
Wait, I missed the disagreement. I thought you and I agree. We agree that brain processes are not prescriptive.
Prescriptive is you're rendering the word prescriptive and using it is a brain process. Okay, it means something to you. It means something.
Okay, so brain processes are prescriptive then.
Something prescriptive would be I'm in my chair and I decide I want a ham sandwich. I prescribe that.
Yeah, I should. Well, this because you have a desire to eat the ham sandwich.
I have a desire to eat the ham sandwich, and that desire is made up of probably a little bit of dopamine, probably a lot of
Is dopamine prescriptive or descriptive?
Dopamine would be descriptive.
But your desire is prescriptive, so you can't
No,
identify
you're
them.
making a category here. You're failing to see that your brain states basically are completely natural. We've agreed to
Wait,
that.
no,
You're
yes.
failing to see.
Look, if they're natural, look, we're missing it. You said, I heard you say that your desire to eat the ham sandwich is prescriptive. I heard you say that.
So I said it. Okay.
Okay, so that means that it's that brain. You said, hold on.
Okay, maybe I was wrong.
Okay, so our desire is prescriptive or not prescriptive?
Desires are prescriptive in our language game, but if we're talking about what is natural and what the brain is doing, we can't talk about desires and prescriptive and descriptive and is and ought in the same way. We have to hash them out naturally in order to understand what is really going on.
Okay, that means that if you equate them, a prescriptive thing with a not prescriptive thing, if you say they're identical, that's textbook contradiction.
Okay. Okay, prescriptive thing with it. Say that again.
Yeah, so I'm going to write it out because it's not really well written there. Okay, look, brain processes are not prescriptive. They are descriptive, right? Sorry for the...
No, they're neither of those things. Brain processes are not descriptive. Descriptive is what humans do with brain processes. When we're
Wait, it's a true dichotomy, though. Any truth about the world is going to be is or ought. So look, true. This is true, right? I ought go to work tomorrow. This is also true, right? I have a brain.
Okay.
Okay, or there is a brain.
Okay, and the second one, we're talking about naturalism, and the first one, we're not.
The first one is prescriptive.
Right.
The second one is descriptive.
Right. And I can describe your prescriptive state where you feel that you ought to go to work.
Okay, wait. I ought, okay, but then I have the argument in the premises, right? That that I ought and I desire to go to work. This is normative as well. This is normative, right? That's in, so these are, if it's normative, it's prescriptive.
Okay.
Okay.
I understand you, Danny.
Okay. And well, if we want to stop it here, that's fine. We can think about it's a lot to think about.
Yeah,
so if you want to just stop and then maybe you can review what we talked about.
Actually, it's not. It's basically you are jumping categories, and you okay.
Give me an argument for this speed. I don't.
Okay, now if we are talking about what is going on with the brain and our mind, what we are, we're talking about what humans are. Okay, then we're going to be talking in one plane, and we're going to be trying to step outside of ourselves, and we're going to be doing autopsies, and we're going to be doing CAT scans, and we're going to be doing a lot of neuroscience, right?
I'm not talking about human beings.
Okay, you're not talking about human beings?
No, we can talk about them. Presumably you think dogs have human beings.
Or raccoons.
Or raccoons, or God. God is supposedly a mind, right?
That's a whole different. Okay, let's talk about human beings, okay? Because dogs don't have words.
We're changing the subject. We're just talking about beliefs and desires. That's all we're talking about. If you want to change the subject to what a human being is, I will agree with you that in order to be a human being, you must have a body. I'm not going to dispute that, right? But all I'm interested in showing you, what you had me come onto this show for, is to show you why I think that the intentionality, that aspect of the mind, is non-natural.
Yeah, and you've shown it to me, so I can see why you're persuaded by your argument.
I would recommend we stop here.
Actually, yeah.
Okay, if you understand, let's think about it. What? Okay.
I'm surprised that you're persuaded by this, but that's fine. I understand.
Okay, that's good. Maybe the cool thing is that it's just you and me talking. If once the video gets out, other people will have heard both of us speak, and they will give feedback in terms of who they agree and disagree with. And then that will add a lot to the whole dialectic.
Okay.
Because honestly, just you and me on here, we can only get so far. The more people we add, the better in terms of maybe how to convey what you're trying to say or what I'm trying to say.
Right. I think we can take this up again with you and I and Dessel.
Okay. No, I showed this argument to Dessel. He thinks that it's a good argument.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so we can talk to him about it.
He can.
And what I mean by good argument is that he understands why I'm committed to this, right? I think he disputes Dessel disputes the first premise.
I kind of feel the same way, that I understand why you're committed to it, and I understand your argument.
Yeah.
So, well, God, do I understand why you're committed? I guess I'm having trouble understanding why people are committed to these things anymore, but that's another problem. So well, I just want to say, I want to say in conclusion, my final statement is that you have made an egregious category error here, and you have drawn your conclusion from one completely different category, which is naturalism. Okay. Or you've made a conclusion about naturalism using nothing but basically a particularly tight language game. So there's a category error there, and that's what I see, and that's all I want to say about it right now.
Okay, and then I'll conclude. I'll be looking forward to our future discussions, especially for the argument for that I made a category error. I'll be interested in that, and we'll go from there.
Okay, good enough. So I will end this, and we will ship it. We'll ship it out, and we'll see what happens. Any broadcast.